The wind, a living entity of ice and sorrow, howled its unending lament across the desolate plains of the Ural Mountains. Dmitry Volkov felt its bite deep in his bones, a familiar ache that did little to numb the colder one in his heart. February 1959, Kolatsiakl, Dead Mountain. In the Mansi tongue, a name of morbid poetry. For Dmitry, a name that now echoed the hollow chambers of his soul. He sat in a squalid one-room hovel on the fringes of Ivdel, a man deliberately erased from the world. Once a legend in the shadowy halls of the GRU Spetsnaz, now he was just Dmitry, a ghost haunted by the faces of men he'd killed and the nation he'd served too well. His disgrace had been swift, a political casualty of a mission gone wrong. They had taken his rank, his reputation, but they couldn't take his skills. Those were etched into his muscle memory, his very being. Weeks had bled into a month since the news had reached him. 9 hikers, his younger brother Igor among them, found dead. The official reports were a mockery, a bureaucratic shrug designed to smother the truth with the cold blanket of implausibility. Asterisk, avalanche. Asterisk, but the tent was slashed from the inside. Asterisk, paradoxical hypothermia. Asterisk, but why were some barefoot, others with injuries consistent with a massive crushing force? Dmitry knew lies. He had lived them, breathed them, perpetuated them in the name of the Soviet Union. But not this time. Not for Igor. Igor, with his bright academic eyes and infuriating optimism, had been his last anchor to a life before the blood and the shadows. While Dmitry learned to kill in silence, Igor studied engineering, filling his letters with talk of turbine dynamics and the romance of the wilderness. "You see only the darkness, Dima," he'd written once. "But there is beauty in the struggle, even in the harshest places." Now, the harshest place had claimed him. The anonymous package had arrived like a shard of ice to the heart, delivered by a furtive courier, who vanished into the pre-dawn gloom. It contained no return address. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, was a coded message from a former contact, a man Dmitry thought long dead. The decryption was simple, a cipher they'd used in Chechnya. The words burned themselves into his mind. Asterisk, Kolatsiakl. Cover-up, KGB Spetsialny Otdel on site. Tracks, non-human. They are hiding something big. Asterisk. And then the catalyst. A single torn page from Igor's journal, the paper stiff with frost. His brother's elegant script, now stark and terrifying under the flickering candlelight. Asterisk. They are not what they seem. The orange light, it burns the mind. We saw it in the sky. Something is out there, drawn to it. It's not a bear. God, it's not a bear. Asterisk. The message ended with coordinates, not for the hikers' camp, but for a secluded Mansi hunting trail nearby. It was a summons, spitting him back into the gaping maw of his old life. Dmitry packed his kit with the chilling efficiency of a man preparing for war. A silenced Makarov pistol, well-oiled and cold to the touch. A custom-forged ice axe, its adze honed to a razor's edge. Thermal layers, high-energy rations, a compass, and a worn, leather-bound copy of Lermontov's poems, a final gift from his mother. He moved like a shadow through the pre-dawn gloom, a phantom seeking another ghost. He would defy every border guard, every military checkpoint, every order from Moscow. He would find the truth on Kolatsiakl, or he would die trying. The journey north was a descent into a frozen hell. Trains, battered civilian trucks. Then, on the outskirts of Vizhai, he acquired a snowmobile. The 2 drunken officials guarding the depot didn't stand a chance. A swift, precise application of force, a brief moment of unconsciousness for them, and Dmitry was gone, a dark shape disappearing into the endless taiga. He felt a flicker of the old coldness. The detached professional. It was a tool, like his knife. He would use it to get to Igor. Finally, he reached the edge of the deep wilderness, the last outpost before the mountain truly asserted its deadly sovereignty. It was here, in a small, smoke-filled trapper's hut reeking of pine tar and cured hides, that he found her. Anya, a Mansi woman, her face a mask of weathered determination, her eyes the color of a winter sky. A worn Mosin Nagant rifle rested in the crook of her arm with an easy familiarity that spoke of a life intertwined with this harsh land. "You are Volkov," she stated, her voice a low, melodic whisper that seemed at odds with her rugged appearance. "The mountain has claimed enough. The spirits are angry. Turn back." "My brother is on that mountain," Dmitri replied, his voice a low growl. He met her gaze. A silent battle of wills fought across the smoky room. "I'm not turning back." He had expected resistance, hostility. Instead, she sighed, a plume of vapor in the cold air. "The authorities, the men in green uniforms, they say the area is closed, but they lie. They are everywhere." Her gaze flickered to the tree line, a subtle, nervous tick. "I will guide you. The Mansi do not leave the lost to wander. It is a matter of respect for the spirits, and for the dead." Dmitri's instincts, honed by years of deception and betrayal, screamed caution. Her reason was too poetic, too convenient. But her knowledge of the terrain was his only viable path. "Why me? Why help me, specifically?" "Your brother," she said, her eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "He passed through our village. He was respectful. He asked about the old stories. He did not laugh, like the others." She looked away. "I will guide you. But we move at night, and we stay to the ancient trails. The soldiers are clumsy. They stick to the valleys." Anya led him deeper into the wilderness, a phantom in her own right. Her snowshoes glided effortlessly over drifts that would swallow a lesser man whole. She spoke little, but her silence was informative, teaching. "Those him, the language of the shifting snow and the groaning ice." Dmitri, ever the operative, observed. Her eyes, though outwardly calm, held a flicker of something desperate, a taut wire of fear he couldn't quite place. He noticed how she'd flinch at the snap of a frozen branch, how her hand would stray to the amulet of carved bone around her neck. She was not just guiding him, she was running from something. Days blurred into an exhausting cycle of trekking through blinding whiteouts, consuming meager rations of dried meat and hard bread, and sleeping in snow shelters dug into the lee of rock formations. The higher they climbed, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by the shriek of the wind. The air grew thinner, the cold a physical presence that seeped through his layers, seeking his bones. Dmitri felt the mountain closing in, its vastness both awe-inspiring and terrifying. He constantly scanned the ridges, his military instincts on high alert, searching for the glint of a scope or the unnatural silhouette of a man against the snow. On the third day, as they traversed a particularly exposed ridge, he saw it, a faint glint of steel, then the telltale smudge of smoke rising from a deep ravine. Far below, camouflaged with practiced skill, was a military encampment. Soviet-issue tents, a radio mast, tracks from a tracked vehicle. Grushin. The name from the message resonated in his mind. Asterisk KGB, Spezialne. Otdel, asterisk, the Special Department. The butchers, men who cleaned up the party's most gruesome messes. KGB, Anya whispered, her voice tight with a fear she could no longer conceal. They arrived weeks ago. They built their camp below the Pass of the Dead. You seem to know a lot about them, Dmitri said, his tone flat, accusatory. He turned to face her, the wind whipping his words away. Why are you really helping me, Anya? Risking your life for the memory of a polite stranger? Anya flinched, her gaze dropping to the snow-covered ground. "My family lives in the valley. The soldiers, they watch us. They ask questions." Her answer was still an evasion, a half-truth he could feel in his gut. He let it lie. For now, he was close. The truth was just over this ridge. As they ascended further, the landscape grew more alien. Twisted, wind-sculpted pines, their branches skeletal fingers, reaching for a sky that seemed perpetually bruised. The silence was no longer empty. It felt charged, pregnant with a dreadful anticipation. He felt it, a primal prickling on his skin, the sense of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. Then, he saw the tracks. Massive, irregular impressions in the virgin snow, unlike any animal he knew. Too large for a wolf, too splayed for a bear, and the gait was wrong, a powerful bipedal stride. They were deep, as if whatever made them was incredibly heavy. He knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of one monstrous print. A faint, acrid smell, like ozone and rot, hung in the frigid air. Interspersed with the large tracks were smaller, human ones. But the human prints were erratic, stumbling, a record of pure panic. "Menk," Anya breathed, her voice barely audible. She traced one of the prints with her finger, her face ashen. The old stories. Forest giants, guardians of the deep woods. But these are different. Angrier. A shiver ran through her, unrelated to the cold. The tracks led towards the pass. Towards Igor. They pressed on, driven now by a silent, shared dread. Anya's fear was now a palpable thing, a scent on the wind. Dimitri's unease solidified into certainty. Something was deeply wrong. And it wasn't just the monster. It was her. They reached the infamous pass. The wind here was a physical force, a solid wall of ice particles that tore at their clothes and scoured their exposed skin. The air was thin, the world a vast, disorienting expanse of white. And then he saw it. The hiker's tent. A ripped, forlorn banner of orange canvas against the blinding snow, half buried, a tombstone marking the epicenter of the tragedy. A knot of ice formed in Dimitri's stomach. This was it. He moved towards it, his ice axe held ready, a grim determination hardening his features. But Anya stopped him, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. "Dima, wait. They are here, beyond the ridge. They are waiting for you." Dimitri whirled, his senses exploding. He scanned the surrounding drifts, the twisted snow formations. Nothing. Yet, Anya's conviction was absolute. "Who?" he demanded, his voice a blade of ice. The dam of her composure finally broke. Tears froze on her cheeks as the words tumbled out. A torrent of guilt and terror. "KGB," she choked out. "Major Grushin. They have my family. My husband. My son. They took them. They said they would send them to the gulags. Or worse, if I didn't lead you here. It was a trap. An ambush." Rage, cold and sharp, lanced through Dimitri. Betrayal. A familiar, bitter taste. But even as the anger flared, he saw the raw agony in her eyes. She was a pawn, not a conspirator. Another victim of the system he once served. Before he could process the betrayal, a voice, harsh and amplified by the wind, cut through the air. Well, if it isn't the disgraced hero, Dmitri Volkov, so predictable. Always chasing ghosts. Major Grushin emerged from a snowdrift not 30 meters away, a grim smile on his thin lips. He was flanked by 4 soldiers in pristine winter camouflage, their faces numb with cold and obedience. Their Kalashnikovs were leveled squarely at Dmitri. Grushin was everything Dmitri had imagined. Lean, cold-eyed, with the calculating stare of a predator who enjoyed his work. "Drop your weapons, Volkov," Grushin commanded, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "You've interfered enough. This is a restricted state security zone. You of all people should know the penalty for that." Dmitri's hand instinctively went to his Makarov, but the odds were impossible. "My brother," Dmitri growled, forcing the words out. "What did you do to him?" Grushin chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Your brother and his friends were careless. They saw something they shouldn't have. A tragic accident, Volkov. The official story is quite clear, and you will not change it." He gestured with a gloved hand. "Take him, and the girl. She has served her purpose." As the soldiers advanced, a strange, ethereal orange glow began to bloom on the horizon, painting the snow-covered peaks in an unearthly light. It pulsed, softly at first, then growing in intensity, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed like living things. A low hum vibrated through the snow, a bass note felt in the teeth and bones. "The orange light," Dmitri murmured, Igor's words echoing in his mind. "The secondary pulse," Grushin muttered, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his face for the first time. "Damn it. It's ahead of schedule." A guttural shriek tore through the howling wind, a sound so primal, so full of raw, incandescent fury that it silenced even the storm. It was closer than before, impossibly close. From the ridge above, a massive, shaggy form burst forth from the snow, propelled by a speed that defied its bulk. It was immense, easily 9 feet tall, a nightmare of matted fur and overdeveloped muscle. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in wicked bone-white claws. But it was the eyes that froze the blood. They glowed with a malevolent, unnatural light, mirroring the pulsating orange glow that now bathed the entire mountain. Patches of its fur seemed to shimmer with the same eerie energy. The Menk, mutated, abhorrent. What in God's name? One of Grushin's soldiers gasped, his rifle wavering. "It's the asset! It's loose!" Grushin roared, his composure shattering. "Fire! Neutralize the asset!" The soldiers, their training overriding their terror, opened fire. Automatic rifles spat tracers into the swirling snow, the sound shockingly loud in the vast emptiness. The Menk roared again, a sound of agony and rage, as bullets tore into its flesh. But it kept coming, a juggernaut of mutated flesh, seemingly impervious to the rounds that should have dropped a bear in its tracks. This was Dmitri's chance. As the soldiers focused their fire, he dropped, rolling behind a snowdrift. He drew his Makarov, its familiar weight a cold comfort. Anya, seizing the moment of chaos, drove her ice axe deep into the thigh of the nearest soldier. He screamed and collapsed, and she scrambled away, a fleeting shadow disappearing into the blizzard. The pass erupted into a maelstrom of violence. Bullets ripped through the air. The Menk was a whirlwind of destruction. It swatted one soldier aside like a doll, his body breaking with a sickening crunch against a rock outcropping. It impaled another on a jagged claw, lifting him high into the air before contemptuously flinging his broken form into a deep drift. The monster's roars were now constant, a frenzied symphony of pain and rage, amplified by the humming orange light. Dmitri, a man reborn in the crucible of combat, moved with lethal precision. He ignored the monster. It was a force of nature, a distraction. His targets were human. He fired 3 controlled shots from behind his cover. The first 2 found their marks, dropping the remaining soldiers, their attention still fixed on the charging horror. Grushin, however, was a survivor. He had already assessed the new threat matrix, and now his pistol was leveled at Dmitri. "You'll never leave this mountain, Volkov!" Grushin snarled, his face contorted with a desperate fury. "This entire incident will be buried under 100 meters of snow and lies." Grushin fired. Dmitri threw himself sideways, a bullet searing the air where his head had been. A searing pain blossomed in his shoulder as Grushin's second shot found its mark, but Dmitri barely registered it, the adrenaline of fire in his veins. He returned fire, a single shot from his Makarov, aimed not to kill, but to maim. The bullet tore through Grushin's wrist, sending his pistol spinning into the snow. The Menk, now grievously wounded and bleeding a dark, viscous fluid that steamed on the snow, turned its enraged gaze from the dead soldiers. It seemed to lock onto Grushin, perhaps sensing in him the source of the energy that pulsed through its mutated body, or perhaps just drawn to the scent of his terror. It let out a deafening roar and charged. Grushin, clutching his shattered wrist, scrambled backward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He was no longer the smug KGB major, just a man about to be devoured by the monster he had been sent to contain. The Menk crashed into him with the force of a train, sending him sprawling. Its massive claws raked across Grushin's chest, tearing through his uniform and flesh with sickening ease. Grushin screamed, a shrill, piercing sound that was abruptly cut off as the creature's jaws closed around his head with a final wet crunch. The Menk, its terrible purpose served, slumped forward over Grushin's body. Its breathing was a ragged, bubbling sound. The orange glow in its fur and eyes began to dim, flickering like a dying ember. "Poetic justice," Dmitri thought grimly as he staggered to his feet. He stumbled towards the abandoned tent, the shredded fabric snapping in the wind. Inside, amidst the frozen, scattered belongings of 9 dead dreamers, he found it. Tucked inside a waterproof satchel, next to a worn copy of poetry, was Igor's complete journal. He clutched it, his fingers trembling. He flipped through the pages, Igor's neat script becoming a frantic scrawl in the final entries. It was all there. The orange light, a secret radiological weapon test that had gone wrong. The device didn't just emit radiation, it emitted a frequency that induced intense paranoia, terror, and irrational behavior. It had driven them mad, and it had acted as a beacon, drawing the Menk from its deep forest lair, mutating it, driving it into a territorial frenzy. The hikers, caught between the mind-altering radiation and a real-life monster, had torn their way out of the tent in a desperate, doomed flight. The Menk had hunted them down in the freezing darkness. Dmitri closed the journal, the truth a cold, heavy stone in his gut. The Soviet Union had not just covered up an accident. They had created a monster, then tried to bury their sins with the bodies of his brother and his friends. He found Anya huddled behind a snowdrift, her face buried in her hands. "It is over," he said, his voice rough. She looked up, her eyes hollow. "My family, Grushin." "Grushin is dead," Dmitri stated, pulling her to her feet. "His men are dead. No one will know you helped me. The official report will be another lie. An avalanche, perhaps." He offered her a grim smile. "We need to go. Now." The journey down was a grueling ordeal. Dmitri's shoulder throbbed with every step, a constant fiery reminder of the battle. The storm raged, but Anya, her resolve hardened by the bloody events, navigated with an unerring instinct. They moved in silence, 2 survivors bound by a terrible secret. As dawn finally broke, painting the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, they stood at the edge of the tree line, looking back at the receding silhouette of Kholat Syakhl. It looked almost peaceful now, draped in a fresh blanket of snow, a pristine white tomb. Dmitri clutched the journal in his pack. It was his proof, his weapon, his burden. The world might never know the full truth of the Dyatlov Pass incident, but he would. And the men who had sent Grushin, the faceless architects of this horror sitting in their warm Moscow offices, would. he would not let them forget. Igor's struggle had not been for nothing. Justice would not be found in a courtroom, but in the shadows where Dmitri now lived. The fight, he knew, was far from over. It had just begun.